So far in my sample application, I'm displaying all of my data items in their raw sort order, but I'd like to be able to explicitly sort and also to filter the data. So I've added a few new features to this version of the project. First, I'll describe how to sort the data. That's the easier part. And I'll go to my data source class. In the data source class, I'll locate my getAllItems method down here, and I'll make a very simple change to my query method call. The query method takes all of these different arguments, and the very last argument is called orderBy. This is a straight old SQL orderBy clause. If you just want to sort in ascending order by a single column, you just need to pass in the column name. And that's what I'll do by passing in itemstable.column_name, meaning the name field of that class matching the name column of the table. And I'll run the code again, and then I'll reload the application, and I'll see the data comes out in the appropriate sort order. And again, that sort order as far as the code goes is only a simple string. If you want to sort by more than one column, pass in a comma-delimited list of column names. Or if you want to sort in descending order, just pass in the appropriate SQL keyword DESC. Whatever string you pass in just becomes a part of the SQL statement. And while I'm in this code, I'll add one little bit of code that I neglected in the last exercise. After you finish with the cursor object, you should always close it. And if you forget to do that, you might see some errors creep into your code. And I'll run this code one more time just to test it thoroughly. And as always, I'll make sure I'm reloading the app and make sure the behavior is the same as before. So that's sorting. That's pretty simple. To demonstrate filtering data, though, I've added a new feature to this application. In the menu, I have items now labeled Display All and Choose a Category. If I choose Display All, nothing happens yet. But if I select Choose a Category, I have a sliding drawer from the left that shows me all of my item categories. When I select an item, I see a toast message indicating what I selected. I'll show you how this code is put together. In the main activities layout file, I've wrapped everything inside an instance of the drawer layout component from the support library. And then, after the relative layout that contains my primary user interface, I've added the navigation drawer component. The main activity class has been refactored quite a bit. I now have a string array called mCategories, and that mCategories string array is coming from this array that's declared in my strings.xml file. So this is where my categories are listed. If I chose, I could instead get those values from a database call. I've just chosen to make them static because I've decided they're never going to change. Going back to the main activity, as the activity starts up, I'm getting references to the drawer layout, to the categories array, and to the list view that will display the items. Then I'm using an array adapter. I'm passing in the ID of a layout file, drawer list item, which is simply a text view and is pulled from the Android SDK. And then I'm passing in my data, the categories list. Then when the user selects an item, I'm getting the category from the data, I'm displaying the toast message, and then I'm closing the navigation drawer. And that's all that's happening so far. Now, when the user selects an item from that list, I want to display only the data items that match that category. And that's the work that I'm going to do in the data source class now. So here are the changes I'm going to make to the getAllItems method. First, it's going to receive a string argument that I'll name category. And my rule will be, if category is null, that means they want all of the data, but if it's a valid string, then I'll filter on that string as the category. So I'll add an if condition here, and I'll say if category is null. And I'll take this code where I'm getting my cursor object, and I'll move it into the conditional block. Now, because I've moved that within the block, I need to make sure the cursor object stays visible to the rest of the code. So I'll split this into a declaration and an assignment. I'll move this up, and I'll initialize it as null. Now, if the category isn't null, that means that the user is asking to filter on a particular category. So I'll add an else clause. And I'll take this bit of code where I'm creating the cursor, and I'll copy and paste it down here. Here's how you do a filter. Take a look at the third and fourth arguments. The third argument is called the selection clause. This is where you put in your raw SQL statement code, and you start each filter with the name of the column you're filtering on, and then either an equals or a greater than, or whatever other operator you want to use. I want to match the name of the category. So I'll replace this null value with items table.column category, and then I'll append to that equals and a question mark. The question mark is a placeholder. Now the next argument is an array of strings called selection args. You pass in an array of strings that has the same number of items as the number of placeholders in your filtering clause. I'll create that code above the cursor call. I'll create a string array, and I'll name it categories, and I'll create it by using shorthand with a pair of braces, and I'll pass in the category argument. If you have more than one placeholder, you'll have more than one argument, and you simply pass them into those braces as a comma-delimited list. Then I'll come back down here to my query method and make sure that I'm on the right argument, named selection args, and I'll pass in categories. And now when the query is processed, the SQLite framework will put together the SQL statement for me. It'll take my string, which starts with the name of the column and ends with the operator and the placeholder, and it will insert each of the arguments by their order in the array into the placeholder references. So now my getAllItems method is done, and I'll come back to the main activity. I'll press F2 to get to any errors. I've moved the code to retrieve data into a method named displayDataItems. This will allow me to call it as many times as I need to. I'm getting the data from the database, creating the adapter object, and then calling setAdapter on the recycler view. So each time I execute a filter, I'm recreating all of these objects. There are finer ways to do this, but this will work fine for a simple application. When I call getAllItems, I now need to pass in a string as the category, and I'll get that value by adding an argument to this method, and I'll pass in the category there. Now I'll press F2 to get back to the next error, and now this call to displayDataItems doesn't work because it needs an argument. And because I'm in the menu option ActionAllItems, I'll pass in null, and that means I want to see everything. I'll press F2 again, and that takes me to the other call to displayDataItems, and this is in the onCreate method as the activity starts up, so again I'll pass in null. All of my errors are gone, and I have just one more task to handle. When the user selects an item from the navigation menu on the left, that's a selection of a particular category. So I'll go to the code where I'm responding to that selection. It's up here in the listener object for the drawer. I have a method named onItemClick, and here I'm getting the category that the user selected. And I'll respond to that request by once again calling displayDataItems and passing in the requested category. And now I'm ready to really test the code. When the app starts up, it automatically shows all data. And if I click and choose a category, and then choose, say, desserts, now I see only the desserts. If I click choose a category again and choose salads, now I see the salads. And if I click display all, I see everything again. Now I'm doing something I wouldn't do in a normal application. In a real application, I wouldn't add items to the options menu to open the sliding navigation drawer. That's because on a physical device, it's pretty easy to drag from the left and show the drawer that way. But on an emulator, that can sometimes be a little bit touchy, so I've added that options item in there to make it easy to open the drawer. But the important thing to understand here is that I'm responding to a user request to filter the data. And I'm doing that by executing an SQL statement that's being put together by the query method of the SDK. The query method is returning the data set. I'm iterating through the data set, adding it to a list, and returning that list. And in the main activity, I'm using the recycler view and the adapter to display the requested data.